Yeah? Alright. Roadmap is just justifications and then voters. Alright, this is basically what we call a Swiss cheese case. It's full of holes and it's fun to chew on. So we're going to get right down into the actual arguments. And it's not original, but it's really funny. Okay, so we're going to get back into the justifications, looking at why the affirmative fails to actually uphold their reasons for change, and why a negative ballot is justified because keeping Guantanamo Bay open with the new restrictions that have been set in place is actually far more beneficial for the United States and for public safety. Let's start off at the top with justification 1. Now, basically, under the idea of that the countries don't have a problem with Guantanamo Bay itself, they just have a problem with the torture, the last affirmative speaker basically said that, well, we're not solving the torture. All we're doing is guaranteeing them the right of due process, or the right of trial that the affirmative outlines in their mandates. First point under this is that torture is already illegal. So what we're doing is by opening Guantanamo Bay, torture is already illegal, and we're also guaranteeing them the due process, which is the affirmative mandate, so we fulfill both of their standards of human rights. Because they had 2 points about human rights. They had due process, and they had torture. Torture is already illegal, so we don't have to deal with that, and we solve due process by having the mandates. Now, they also said that just because something's illegal doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And if that's the case, then that means whatever prison the detainees are transferred to, they're going to be tortured. So the affirmative can't claim to solve that if it's in fact true. All right, now let's move down to the soft power debate. The last affirmative speaker basically had 2 responses. One, saying that we're just gaining soft power, we're not using it. And second, that it doesn't matter. First, under the first argument, if there was evidence allowed in Parley, I'd have a much better response to this. But the fact of the matter is that when the United States has soft power, it inevitably uses it. And you can look to multiple examples in history that prove that point. Now, the second argument about how it doesn't matter, unfortunately, it does. And by neglecting to address it does not mean that you can disregard it on the flow. They did not address any of the arguments, except he briefly touched on the Russia point, which leaves Europe relations, terrorism, nuclear proliferation, and the fact that soft power itself ends up in the destruction of the United States, unaddressed, flowing to the negative side of the ballot. Under the second justification, talking about overcrowding, not under the second justification, under the reasons to prefer, he said, well, basically, we're not sending a lot of criminals to these prisons. It's only maybe 100 here, or 20 or 30 there. The problem is that U.S. prisons are already at 100%. They can't take any more. So it doesn't matter if it's 5, it doesn't matter if it's 2. They have no more space. And so when it comes down to it, when you cram additional people into a place where they can't fit, where there is no more additional bed space, there is no more additional infrastructure, riots and inevitable releases to try to decrease the overcrowding is the end result. So when we boil it down, it comes down to really to 2 issues. The first voting issue is that of public safety. Because if you look at the Cold conceded throughout the entire round was our first reason to prefer of security, of having the criminals on the United States shores or off the United States shores. They never once addressed that. They have cold conceded throughout the round. The overcrowding point we win because prisons are already maxed out. They cannot take any additional people. And the human rights abuses, the counter plan has a net increase of human rights over the affirmative plan. Second voting issue is the soft power debate. The affirmative has dropped these issues. They cannot bring it up in the next speech. The damages of soft power that will happen under the affirmative plan justifies a negative ballot in and of itself. These voters are independent. If we even win one, we would ask for your ballot. And that's why I would ask you to vote for the negative team.
I'm going to go steal a car because they can't send me to prison.
That's fascinating, Drew. You let me know how that works for you.
Yeah, me too, actually.
Did you get it set?
Yeah.
Is it all good? Okay. I'm really glad this is the last speech. All right. Are you ready? Y'all ready? Oh, no flowing. It's the last speech. Okay. All right. I have an interesting analogy for the last speech. Drew gave this to me as I was walking up, and it's regarding the negative team's counter plan. It's like my old Converse Chucks. They have a bunch of holes and rips in them, and they really need to be thrown away. All right, now that we have that out of the way, I'd like to address that the only thing the negative team and the affirmative team disagree about is whether to close Gitmo or whether to leave it open. Everything else is really null and void because we all agree that there are human rights abuses there, and we all agree that torture is wrong, and we all agree that these individuals that are being detained there need to be brought into a court of law, tried, and prosecuted. We all agree on those things. So let's disregard those issues and bring it back to the issues that really matter in this debate round and the voting issues that should matter, which are the political gain that the United States will be reaping by closing Guantanamo Bay, and then secondly, the human rights that the affirmative team will be the human rights abuses that will be prevented by through the affirmative team's plan. All right, now my voting issues today will be those two, justification 1 and justification 2, and all the negative teams justification or voters will flow underneath of those. All right, so my first point under political gain is that we will have better relations with other countries that currently disdain our prison practices as a result of closing Guantanamo Bay. We see that since Guantanamo Bay is open, since Guantanamo Bay is open, there are countries like Britain, and then we also have the United Nations that are pressuring the United States to close Guantanamo Bay. And because of that, if we do close Guantanamo Bay and comply with their wishes, those two nations will respect the United States more for making the right decision, and will have more influence over them in issues like healthcare reform, and on the economy, other topics that we need to have an influence on. So my impact here is we will be gaining soft power, not necessarily using it, but just gaining the influence over those nations. How much time do I have left?
A minute 40.
Okay. All right, my second justification is human rights. My first point here, point A, is that we all agree that these detainees have a right to a trial, and both plans would solve for that. However, under the affirmative team's plan, torture will not continue because there will be Gitmo will be closed, so there's nowhere for them to be tortured. In American prisons, nobody has mentioned that in American prisons there's waterboarding or any other forms of torture going on. However, in Gitmo, torture is commonly used, and so by closing the prisons, we will remove that problem of torture. Thank you. All right, point C is that criminals are consistently leaving prisons on bail and on parole, so there will, of course, be beds available for these prisoners. And when you consider Lydia's statistic that there are actually only 1,200 prisoners in Gitmo, and that only 30% of those individuals are guilty, you have a relatively small amount of individuals coming to the United States and requiring a bed. Or you can always consider the option that under our plan, these individuals will be subjected to the United States court, or will be subjected to United States law as a penalty for what they have done. So depending on the degree of their guilt, some of them may be subjected to capital punishment, which means they wouldn't have a bed. They wouldn't require a bed.
Yeah.
So because the United States will be gaining political soft power and human rights will be upheld and blah, blah, blah. Vote for the neighborhood.
Okay, I have lots of comments.
As
Peter
you
goes
should.
to turn off the video.